Remember, you can get in touch with our Fearsome Foursome by emailing clubdubpodcast@mail.com and through Twitter, using the hashtag @clubdubpodcast.
Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Hi, I'm Rob Rose, and welcome to the Club Dub Football Podcast. This week, we're still focusing on the upcoming NFL draft, but now turning our attention away from quarterbacks to the other offensive starlets that might be the apple in the eye of your particular NFL franchise. To get our thoughts, stick with us for the next hour where we'll review who we think lands where and who could make the difference for teams in the coming season. With so much to get into, let's throw over now to JB, PB and Aldrin and get on with the show.
NFL draft is officially open. The Cincinnati Bengals are on the clock. The first pick in the 2020 draft, the Cincinnati Bengals select Joe Burrow, quarterback, LSU.
Welcome, gents.
Hi, Rob.
Oh, hi, PB. And welcome to another fantastic, action-packed edition of the Club Dub Football Podcast, where now we're going to continue from our theme of last week in the NFL draft and give all of our listeners the second episode in our brilliant draft trilogy, this week focusing on all of the offensive talent outside of the quarterback position. If you want all the lowdown on every quarterback prospect in the draft that's due to go round one or so, please listen to next week. But before we get into all draft things, it's very rare that we would take a moment and talk about the retirement of a true NFL great. We can maybe get into whether this man finds himself into the Hall of Fame as part of our discussions. But obviously Julian Edelman, after 12 seasons with the New England Patriots and a number of Super Bowl rings on his fingers, has decided his injuries are too great to carry on, and so he leads the league. To go around our virtual room, who wants to kick us off with their thoughts on the wondrous career of Julian Edelman?
So there was something in your introduction there of this point that kind of made me stop and think. Sort of when you said a Hall of Fame worthy career, you know, and the discussion has been, you know, he's one of the best players to play the game. And every time I've seen that, and every time I've heard people say it, I've always thought, well, hang on a minute, is he? Is he actually that good? And you sort of go through and you think, oh well, would you put him above? Would you put him above Jerry Rice? Would you put him above Randy Moss? Would you put him above Larry Fitzgerald? Would you put him above, being a Steeler, Hines Ward or Lynn Swann or something like that? And then every time I go down that route, I end up coming back to that catch in the Super Bowl against the Falcons, where you could slide a piece of paper just in the gap between where the ball was and where the ground was. And you think there are very, very, very few players who could actually make that catch and do that. And to me, I think Julian Edelman epitomizes that player that you have on the team that you absolutely know when the chips are down, when you need someone to make a play, when you need someone to do it, like when you need someone to catch the ball, Julian Edelman is the player that will do that. He's very much in that like Larry Fitzgerald kind of league. And you look at his stats and his performances and you think, well, yeah, why wouldn't he make the Hall of Fame? You know, critical to his team's success. The rapport he had with Brady sort of, I think, mirrors that with Gronk. And it's one of those things of, would Brady have had as much success without Gronk, or would Brady have had so much success without Edelman, especially in the playoffs? So yeah, it is kind of a sad day to see him go. And yeah, I think he does deserve to be up there and considered as one of the best and deserve to go in the Hall of Fame.
I'm kind of with you exactly on your last point, really, in terms of it's just his postseason performances. You know, you can look at a lot of players and say, oh, they're brilliant in the regular season and then they don't do it in the postseason. But Edelman is just one of those guys that turns up in the big moments and the pressure never seemed to get to him. Like you say, I mean, that catch was ridiculous, how he made it. I've no idea. But I think you've just got to look at not necessarily those kind of big splash plays, but in the postseason, just his consistency. You know, he was a safe pair of hands, like you say, that kind of safety blanket alongside Gronk for Tom Brady. And I'm certainly of the opinion that without Edelman, they maybe don't have the same success that they had, because he was so assured at moving the chains and just catching the ball and moving things along. I don't think, apart from, you know, that amazing catch, there aren't necessarily massive, like big splash plays that you think can go, oh, wow, Edelman, you know, he makes these incredible one-handed catches, or he goes off for 90 yards on a single catch, you know, but just consistency and moving the ball. And yeah, I think just his postseason record on its own is worthy of getting into the Hall of Fame for that achievement and the rings that he's got with it. So yeah, I think he's in there.
Yeah, for me, I'd say he's a Hall of Famer, but I'd say it's purely based on his postseason performance. I know there's a lot of chat about whether he's a Hall of Famer or not, and I think I saw someone suggest that Devin Hester should get in the Hall of Fame before Edelman, and I don't disagree that Hester should be in there, but for me, I think Edelman's a 3-time Super Bowl winner, a 1-time Super Bowl MVP, and I think, you know, he was a big part of the success that the Patriots had in the playoffs. So for me, he's a Hall of Famer, but it's, yeah, maybe an arguable case. He might not be a first ballot. But he's another one of those real draft success stories, isn't he? You know, a 7th round player drafted as a quarterback, you know, coming out of college as a quarterback, you know, makes the team as a punt returner and kick returner, and eventually, you know, finds his way as a wide receiver. So, you know, he's had a real successful career. You know, a shame to see it ended by injuries, but yeah, massive part of their success, and you know, an enjoyable player to watch as well, I think.
I think you've kind of hit another nail on the head there, Phil. And I think when you talk about the New England Patriots dynasty as it was from when Belichick took over, and you think of kind of the epitome of the just do your job. They were the players that Belichick wanted, players that understood that you need to do what you need to do on the field. You need to go and execute these things. And if you execute your stuff and they execute their stuff and they execute their stuff, we will be successful. And you think of the kind of the most notable Patriots from that kind of era, and you think of guys like Teddy Bruschi, think about Troy Brown, and you think about Julian Edelman as the epitome of those players who went out, did their job, didn't worry about anything else, didn't worry about being flashy, didn't worry about being big names. Like we talk about with Edelman, like Aldrin said, it wasn't about highlight reel catches like you'd get from like an Odell Beckham Jr., and it wasn't about having the most receptions in a season like you get with someone like Antonio Brown. It was literally, I will do my bit. And sometimes that means I will have 2 catches, and sometimes it means I'll have like 16 or something like that, because I think he got into double figures. Again, I think in that Falcons Super Bowl. And it kind of, if you're building a football player from the ground up, that's the kind of attitude that you would want to instill in them, that kind of thing of, I will do my job. I am here to support my teammates. And what more can you say about someone as a compliment than that?
You know, when you say, oh, I think he gets into the Hall of Fame, but only because of his postseason record, to my mind, where else do you want a player to perform? You know, it's all well and good. You know, somebody might put up, I don't know, 200 yards against the Jacksonville Jaguars in the regular season. You want players to perform, and players get into the Hall of Fame for their postseason record. It's not, you know, good performances against some of the lowlier teams. It's in those clutch moments that you need somebody to step up and be the guy and win you Super Bowls. It's not about winning the regular season. So I just think, yeah, that postseason record for me stands above a lot of other receivers that are in there. So I think you've got to put him in.
There's so many things to love about Edelman, isn't there? And certainly when they had that period with Edelman, and I probably always think of him in the same breath as Amendola, actually, for what the two of them did, that gutsy kind of over the middle type receiver who didn't necessarily have the height or the speed, but just had that great awareness and fitted so beautifully into that system. But I think, isn't it lovely we've got a consensus? I think he gets there. I think his postseason play has been absolutely fantastic. And do you know, the other thing for me is you look back over the dynasty that is the Patriots since, 2001, and there's a lot of narrow victories, amongst those Super Bowl wins. There's a lot of one-score wins. And do you know what? I even think back to, games like, that absolute bore fest against the Rams where neither team could really get anything going. And you just look at those people who drag their teams over the line and you think of someone like Julian Edelman. So absolutely, thrilled for the guy that he's had an amazing career. As Phil said, it's a pity it ends with injury, but I think 12 years is a good run in the modern day NFL, for a small-bodied receiver. And I kind of think he might get their first ballot, but if not, you don't think it'll take too many, do you? You don't think he'll take up all of his chances. But yeah, Julian Edelman, the Club Dub Footballing Podcast, salutes you. And if that's the big news of the week, the only other big news really worthy of mention is that nobody in the news media can seem to agree on one of the big draft stories that we covered last week about whether the San Francisco 49ers have moved up to number 3 to pick a QB, their QB of the future and the guy they can hang their franchise on, or whether they're looking to do something completely different and create something the league has not seen very often, if ever before, namely put the 2 best tight ends in the league, or arguably 2 of the top 3 or 4, and have them lining up on either side of the line for the 49ers for the next, 7, 8, 9, 10 seasons to come. So if I throw over to you, Aldrin, as our draft and college football expert, is there any chance in your mind that Pitts as a tight end goes 3 to the San Francisco 49ers?
I have to say no, purely because I don't think anybody gives up that much draft capital to move up for a non-QB. I just don't think it happens. But that said, Kyle Pitts is an absolute freak of an athlete. So if they do go and get him, I think they get a hell of a player. If you watch his college tape, and I'll tell you what, just watch his pro day. Just watch his pro day, because some of the throws coming towards him are wobbly. They're not close to his body. And he's just plucking them out of the air as easy as pie. I think he is the absolute epitome of a modern tight end, in the mold of exactly who they've already got, George Kittle, and then kind of Travis Kelce, who, arguably they fight it out every year for breaking tight end records between them. So I think, he's big, he's athletic. He's one of those players as well that, although he's a tight end, you could easily play him out wide. He's got the speed and the physicality and the catch ability to play anywhere, really. So I just think he's an absolute monster. I don't see him going to the 49ers purely because, like I said, I don't think you give up that much to draft a tight end. But I don't see him slipping beyond 4, if I'm honest. I think if I'm the Atlanta Falcons, he's the guy I'm taking if he's there. Tight ends present such a mismatch in like the modern day, and somebody like Kyle Pitts is just an absolute monster of a tight end. Yeah, I mean, his blocking isn't 100%, but I don't think you get many tight ends that come out that are good at catching and blocking from college. They're good at one or the other, and I think he's got the physicality to learn some of that blocking technique and improve in that regard. But ultimately, you don't necessarily want him blocking. You want him getting down the field and catching passes from, your tight end, your quarterback of choice. So, yeah, I think Kyle Pitts is an absolute monster.
Yeah, so I think Pitts is arguably the best player in the draft talent-wise. So it's what... I don't think the 49ers are going to trade up for Pitts because they've got Kittle. What's the point of then taking Pitts as well? You're just stealing snaps from another one of your impact players. So then you look at number 4. The Falcons have got, Hayden Hurst. But, he's not a star tight end. So could they potentially go for him? Maybe. But then does a quarterback needy team like the Broncos want to trade into number 4? So it's interesting when you see the, arguably the best player in the draft then start to drop. But I don't think he makes it past probably 6. Because if you look at, Atlanta might take a quarterback. It depends who's available. They might take Pitts. If they don't take Pitts, the Bengals would be crazy to take a receiver or a tight end. I think they need to work on the O-line. I think they will probably come on to talk to him, but I think they talk about him, but they need to take Sewell. So then you look at the Dolphins at 6, and I really think that's where Pitts might end up. Obviously, he's a Gator at the moment, so stay in Florida, a familiar place for him. So, I think he's a phenomenal talent. I think he's going to go high, definitely top 10, if not top 5. But I think we could end up seeing him drop to Miami at 6.
So I'm approaching this maybe a little bit differently, and I think completely differently to maybe the point that Phil's just made. Because why would you take Pitts? You've already got Kittle. You're stealing snaps away from Kittle. Yes, that is one side of the coin, but the other side of the coin is you can only double cover so many people before you're not covering someone. And ultimately, if teams are having to double cover Kittle, that means either Pitts is single covered or Pitts is also double covered, which means a wide receiver or back. And if we assume, let's say they go with Pitts and they stick with Jimmy G is still mobile. He's not a big rushing quarterback like a Cam Newton or Lamar Jackson or a Kyler Murray, but he's still nimble. He will run when he needs to because he makes smart decisions like that. That opens up to the fact that, well, hang on a minute. What you've then got is you've got an unpredictable offense paired up with one of the most creative minds on the offensive side of the football in Kyle Shanahan. Who is going to stop that? It's kind of like I've talked about this before. It's that like Hydra approach. You cut off one head and 2 more take its place. Remove Kittle, you've got Pitts. Remove Kittle and Pitts. Well, then what are you going to do with the rest? And yes, the 49ers wide receiving core isn't full of your big name players. It's got a lot of Julian Edelman style players. Contributors who do the right thing, go where they need to go, run their routes, and the ball will come to them. And if you're dealing with that, how do you stop it? All of a sudden, you've got a very solid 49ers defense now having an incredible, unpredictable offense that will just dice teams up.
So I think the 49ers wish they had Julian Edelman type receivers. I think that's a real compliment to the 49ers receiving core. I think, on your point, I think the whole Pitts to the 49ers piece is even more fundamentally interesting than that, because you say, you can't double cover both. But think about at the moment, if you're a team who wants to ground and pound and you want to run the ball, well, what do? You bring out a jumbo set, right? You bring out extra linemen, you bring out extra tight ends. What if you're set up, imagine Shanahan set up looking as if you were going to run for all the money in the world, if you're looking at a traditional formation layout, only for the opposition to be aware that 2 of those run blockers are possibly 2 of the best catching players in the entire league. I think it would be fascinating if Pitts went to the 49ers. To kind of close this, Aldrin, I was about to say, I think I'm with you. I think I'm with all 3 of you, actually, that I don't think you move up and give up that much for a tight end in this league. The other thing I think this type of speculation does the 49ers no harm, actually, because it leaves everybody else pretty much sat where they are. If you're the Broncos, I think that was Phil's example. I think it's a good example, right? Somebody like the Broncos who's looking for a quarterback, well, you're not interested in making a phone call and you're not interested in trading up in the draft until you know who the 49ers pick at 3 and I think probably who the Falcons pick at 4. Because I think if you think, I saw a mock draft today that had Fields still available at 24 for the Steelers. That's never going to happen in a million years. But there are teams just the wrong side of the top 10 who'll be thinking maybe if things go our way, just as you described, Phil, actually, well, the Bengals need, an offensive tackle. Then maybe the Dolphins need playmakers. So if Pitts isn't there, maybe they go wide receiver. I think it does kind of keep everybody sitting very still and nobody else really trading picks until they know exactly what happens at 3 and 4. And then on draft night itself, we could see an absolute frenzy.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think not so much at 3. I think a quarterback's going to go 3. They're not trading up that much not to take a quarterback, surely. But you're right. I think we'll see once a quarterback's gone 3. I think we'll see what the Falcons do. They could field a few phone calls, but if the Falcons take a quarterback, then I can see the phones going off for the Bengals as well. So yeah, I think you're right. I think the first 2 or 3 are probably fairly nailed on quarterback, and then it's going to be really interesting to watch what happens.
I think Rob's point is really apt though, because as soon as you get past 4, you're probably not looking at any team that's going to take a quarterback until you get to the Broncos, right? If the Falcons don't trade that pick or they take a quarterback or whatever, if they take Kyle Pitts, like I kind of think, then you're not looking at a quarterback needy team until 8 or 9. And you're also not thinking that any of those teams are probably really that willing to trade out, because they're all, teams that could be on the cusp that want to pick up top tier players. If I'm the Bengals, I desperately need a left tackle, so I'm taking Sewell. I don't want to trade down. If I'm I think the only one maybe might be the Panthers. They might be willing to trade down. Now they've got a quarterback, they might be willing to trade down to somewhere like New England at 15, and still pick up a top tier player. But ultimately, if you've just brought in a quarterback and you're picking at 8, well, you want the pick of the players there. You could get a Jalen Waddle or a top tier wide receiver to add to your talent pool and kind of support that quarterback you brought in. So yeah, I think Rob's right. I think you kind of see where it slips before you make the call once kind of 3 and 4 are in.
Yeah, I agree with that point. I think talking about the Bengals potentially trading, the Bengals would need to get, in my mind, a Herschel Walker trade level of compensation to consider changing out of that pick if quarterbacks go 1 to 4. Because when you get to the Bengals then at 5, all of a sudden it's like, well, we could have anybody. Instead, if they want to focus on offense and if they consider Pitts that generational player that some people do, you take him. Aldrin's right. They need a left tackle. They need to shore up that offensive line because Joey B needs to stay upright if he's going to keep going. So take Sewell. Or, they've just seen Bernard go. They're getting some decent stuff out of Mixon. Is it outside of the realm of possibility that that coaching staff might think, actually, we've got the pick of anybody, let's go Harris, let's go Etienne and see what happens there? Or if their draft plan is, right, we want to come out of this with Harris or Etienne, to borrow from draft day, if it is Najee Harris, no matter what, then you entertain the idea of, okay, well, let's see what we've got and let's see who wants to move up and all of that. I was thinking about this week. It's incredible that I think everybody is convinced that position group 1, 2, 3 is going to be quarterback. And then I think everybody is talking themselves into position group at 4. And then bonkers afterwards, because who knows what anybody is going to do after that. And it comes back to Rob's point of you need to see who's available and what's there to then make a decision. It's not just pick the best available player, because as I said, you could have 3 or 4 best player availables to choose from. Like, Aldrin talked about Jalen Waddle. You've got Jamar Chase or Devonta Smith could be available at wide receiver.
A few quick bits from me. I mean, on the back of Phil's point, he said about I can't see the 49ers not taking a quarterback, and neither can I. Let's start with that. So I fundamentally agree with his point. But I think actually if I was a 49ers fan, I'd rather we take Pitts at 3 than Mac Jones at 3. I think there's in my mind, it really depends on which quarterback they've got in mind. But anyway, we promised the people a non-quarterback show, and we're starting to get here now with JB. I mean, I think your point, JB, leads us nicely into wide receivers, and I think you mentioned, so Waddle, Smith and Chase. If you're thinking you want a wide receiver, and maybe on the Dolphins, right? If the Dolphins don't get Pitts and the Dolphins are looking for playmakers for Tua Tagovailoa, and they're looking for a wide receiver, are they the type of team that says, well, look, on our draft board, we've got 2 wide receivers. And we're looking for a wide receiver. And they're looking for a wide receiver. Are they the type of team that says, well, look, on our draft board, we've got 2 wide receivers. And they're looking for a wide receiver. Are they the type of team that says, well, look, on our draft board, we've got 2 wide receivers. And they're looking for a wide receiver. Are they the type of team that says, well, look, on our draft board, we've got 2 wide receivers. And they're looking for a wide receiver. Are they the type of team that says, well, look, on our draft board, we've got 2 wide receivers. And they're looking for a wide receiver. Are they the type of team that says, well, look, on our draft board, we've got 2 wide receivers. And they're looking for a wide receiver. Are they the type of team that says, well, look, on our draft board, we've got 2 let's stick with those three, right? Waddle, Chase and Smith, we rate all three of them highly. They're not all going to go top 10, are they? I mean, could you then trade with Patriots at 15 if they really want their quarterback of the future? I mean, I think this leads us nicely into, I think there's great depth at the wide receiver position. Running back, I wonder if there's much draft stock really in running backs for a lot of teams. It doesn't feel like there's a Saquon Barkley-like talent that's going to pull anybody out in the top 5 or 6 to want to go running back for me. But am I missing something? Are those three wide receivers the big playmaking offensive talents outside of, well, let's say Pitts, we talked him to death, and the quarterbacks? And Aldrin, do you want to kick off with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I know Phil said earlier that Pitts is arguably, the best player in the draft. I think Jamar Chase is better than Pitts, just as a more refined player, because his playmaking ability at the wide receiver position is absolutely off the charts. I know that he sat out the last year, and that's kind of why you've seen more talk from the Jalen Waddles and the Devontae Smiths, because they've been playing and been playing at a really elite level. But I think you can't forget the kind of performances that Jamar Chase has put in. He is an absolute stud at the wide receiver position. I think his route running and his catching radius is unbelievable. And I think he walks into pretty much any team in and around the league and is immediately their wide receiver one. I think you look at the success of Justin Jefferson the last year. I think Jamar Chase is, I would almost say, head and shoulders above him in terms of his college tape and his ability. But if you think of that kind of impact, I think that Jamar Chase quite easily has that for anybody in the top 10. But I do think I think if you get beyond the Bengals picking an offensive tackle, I think inside that top 10, between 4 and 10, you could easily see those three guys go off the board. I think they're all real top tier playmakers. So I wouldn't be shocked to see all of them go early.
Well, just looking down the draft order, and just to confirm this, just so everybody's aware of what we're talking about. Bengals at 5, Dolphins at 6, Lions at 7, Panthers at 8, Broncos at 9, Cowboys at 10, Giants at 11, Eagles at 12, Chargers at 13, Vikings at 14, and Patriots at 15. And I won't carry on going through the rest of them. But those sort of, 10, 11 teams, I think it is, that were just named there, have gaps almost everywhere. There isn't a team in that, and obviously there's not going to be, because it's the bottom half of the draft, but there isn't a team in that you look and think they are one spot away from a change. The Chargers potentially being the exception to that. I think the Chargers have got a good team that have always fallen short for various other reasons recently. And it all comes back to what does your staff want? Who do you think the best choice for you is? Because there are positives for the three wide receivers we're talking about. And legitimately, I think we can make cases for why Waddle's the best, why Chase is the best, and why Smith's the best. And all three of those cases can be right, and all three of those cases can be wrong, because it depends on the team. Let's take the Cowboys, because they were the first one that I saw in eyeline there. Right. CD Lamb had a decent rookie season, and he's looking to expand on that. They've still got the guy they took from the Raiders, who, as always,
Cooper.
The offensive line is coming back together after a bit of an injury-plagued 2020 season. So, do they want to go, okay, let's pick up Devonta Smith because we think he is the best wide receiver, and try and replicate that triplets that we know they had back in the 90s, but now actually it's quadruplet because you've got Elliott along with those 3 top-tier wide receivers. And again, going back to what we talked about, what I said with the 49ers and Pitts, is it just we are going to just bombs away?
I think my thing with what you pointed out there is I think the names you've listed makes it more likely that those 3 guys go inside the top 10, because I think if I'm the Miami Dolphins, I desperately need more playmakers to supplement Tua. We've decided on him as the starter, clearly. So I want another wide receiver, and if Jamar Chase is there, 100% I'm taking him. If Kyle Pitts is there, I'm taking him. But let's say that Pitts goes 4. If Jamar Chase is there, I take him. If I'm the Detroit Lions, I've just lost my top wide receiver 1, so I'm desperate for another wide receiver. And if Jalen Waddle's there, I take him. If Devonta Smith's there, I'd take him. And then if I'm the Panthers, again, I spent all my draft capital last year on defensive players. So, if Devonta Smith's there, how can you not take him? Supplement your new QB and take away some of the necessity for McCaffrey to do everything. So I think just those three teams alone take a wide receiver in my mind, unless they trade down. But I would be taking a wide receiver desperately for them.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? I could see 3 going in the top 10, but I don't know if they will, because I don't know if the Panthers will go receiver. You can argue the Bengals might go receiver, and I think they've said that they're set at the tackle position with these 2 guys they've picked up in free agency. I think they'd be mad not to take Sewell to protect Burrow, but we'll see. And
I think that might be a bit of a smokescreen, though.
Yeah.
You say, "Oh, we're all set at tackle," and then that pumps up the draft stock. If a Denver Broncos or a New England Patriots wants to trade up for me, you go, "Well, yeah, okay, we'll field calls." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a very good point, I suppose. So, but if they don't go Sewell, you'd imagine that they'd go Jamar Chase, because obviously he played with Burrow at LSU. Then you go to the Dolphins, and they need talent. They're probably set a tight end with Gesicki. I don't think they'll go for Pitts. Arguably, they maybe should, but I don't know if they will. They probably look at wide receiver. And then you think probably Devonta Smith, because he played with Tua at Alabama. I think they'd go Smith over Waddle. And then, I think Lions have a lot of needs, to be honest. And they've not said that they're not going to go quarterback either. So it'll be interesting. But I don't know. The Lions desperately need receivers, but would they spend their, the number 7 pick on a receiver when there's other stuff out there? If Kyle Pitts is there, as an example, still at number 7, do the Lions not take him? So it's going to be interesting. I can see three wide receivers going in the top 10, but if I had to put money on yes or no, I'd say no.
I think for me, it's if anyone trades into the top 10, I don't think they're trading into the top 10 to get a receiver, are they? I mean, looking at that draft order, 11 to 20, I mean, you got people like the Patriots, the Cardinals. There's a bit of talk about the Washington football team wanting a quarterback in this draft. I think if they've got their eye on somebody particularly, they'd have to move up to get one of these top talents that are being touted. The other odd thing, I mean, for some of these teams who are rebuilding, let's take the Lions, actually, Phil. That was a great shout with the Lions. They've obviously got all these picks coming in future years as a result of, Stafford going and Goff coming in. So they could be a team tempted to take a longer-term view. If you're trading with a team to get the Lions at 7 or something, heart of the top 10, you're looking at 2 firsts, aren't you, I think, still? Or maybe a first and 2 seconds. Actually, I think it's multiple firsts, really, to put a team in the top 10 these days. So, I mean, some of those teams could be. I mean, my question then is, for these wide receiver needy teams, and maybe needy is the wrong word, but for teams who'd be keen to add a playmaker, the only other wide receiver that's been talked about going first round and getting anywhere near top 15, top 20 is Tony out of Florida, who seems, I don't know, small-bodied, I don't know, kind of an odd type player to go high in the draft. I mean, the equivalencies are being made to people like T.Y. Hilton, people in that kind of mold at 5'11". I mean, is there anybody outside those top three who's a real... I mean, you said it, Aldrin. Is there anyone outside those top three players who's an immediate wide receiver one for a team?
I don't think so. I think Kadarius Toney is... He's not a wide receiver one in the NFL, I don't think. I think he sits best as a wide receiver two. But the only thing I would say with him is he's lightning fast, and speed gets drafted higher than, maybe the talent necessitates, because, I mean, we've seen it with John Ross. I mean, the guy couldn't catch a ball, but he could run damn fast, and the Cincinnati Bengals picked him up really early in the draft for, where his kind of talent and college level kind of suggested. So I would say that I see Toney going later in the first round as a wide receiver too, but he's got that speed, and sometimes, if teams fall in love with him, then, maybe you go, okay, well, he's got the pace, we'll teach him the rest. But no, for me, I think the wide receiver group is really talented at the top. And then beyond that, you've got a lot of more rough players that maybe need a little more work and a little more time, and necessarily aren't wide receiver ones. But I don't know, you saw Justin Jefferson drop last year, and he was the best player, probably that came out of the draft, bar Herbert. So, I think that in itself shows. But yeah, I think beyond top three, you're taking a gamble. So I don't see anybody else going high in the draft.
So the other point then, to bring us on from, so we've talked a bit about O-line, or maybe one specific member of the O-line at all. Running backs seem to be very hard for, and I mean, I'm counting people who do this for a living day in, day out, who watch far more college football than I do. But there doesn't seem to be much of a consensus on just how high running backs might go. I mean, there seems to be a general consensus about who the real top-tier talents are, starting with, I think, JB, you mentioned Etienne probably being the one that most people see going first. But how early, realistically, do we think we'll see a running back go? Is there any team, in and around the top 10, 15, 20 who you think might either be tempted by those talents or really see it as a need?
So running back's kind of been the position that I've been dwelling on in the draft, because obviously it's a need for my Pittsburgh Steelers, so it's the one I'm going to be most interested in. And there was a lot of talk sort of over recent years, kind of with the high draft picks of guys like Ezekiel Elliott, guys like Todd Gurley, Saquon Barkley, is this the rediscovery of the importance of the running back position? And it never really developed past then. And I think it's kind of been shown by the fact that Barkley's never really shown what he's capable of because he's been injured. Gurley, obviously, his career is kind of not coming to a close, but you can see maybe it's hit a ceiling for other reasons related to his knee. And Elliott last year just didn't appear to have anything going on at all. No juice whatsoever. And I think it's these things that are probably making a lot of draft specialists and a lot of teams look it up and consider, right, how much capital are we going to put into a position that potentially might not have that much of a lifespan? And thinking back to like something that I think gets referenced at times, the old Jimmy Johnson draft chart, where this is how many points each position in the draft is worth, and this is how we have rated each of these players. So is there enough of a potential discrepancy between how much the pick is worth versus how much the player is worth for this to be a smart decision for us to take? I think Harris and Etienne are the two running backs that have the best opportunity to go in the first round. And being completely honest, hopefully one of those goes to those same Pittsburgh Steelers that I have mentioned before. But in the first 15, I can't really see it. In the first 20, no, because there is an incredible amount of defensive talent in this draft that we might be talking about next week. Foreshadowing, mustache twirl. And it's into that point where after you're out of the 20, it's kind of like, well, someone's got to take a chance on one of these. But, and I know I've spoken for a bit on this and I do want to shut up so other people can say it, the one thing that I will kind of keep in mind is the best running back that the Steelers have had in my time watching the NFL was Le'Veon Bell, and Bell got taken in the second round. Just because you don't go in the first doesn't mean you're not an amazingly talented player. And just because something happens in the first doesn't mean you can't find a good running back later on. I think it's incredibly curious.
I can see a running back not going in the first round. I could see, potentially running backs not start coming off the board until, early in the second round. I don't think the Jaguars have got, is it Robinson they picked last year? Yeah, so they're pretty set at running back. But then, the Jets at 34, I think if those top two running backs are still there at 34, I think they'll definitely take one in round 2. But arguably, you could even see the Buccaneers taking a running back at 32. We've just picked up Gio Bernard. We've got Ronald Jones. We've got Leonard Fournette, but all of their contracts end at the end of this season. Keyshawn Vaughn, who we got last year, drafted last year, hasn't really done, a whole lot, albeit he's not had a great deal of snaps. So if you see someone like Najee Harris or Travis Etienne there, when we're picking at 32 and think they're the future, then we've got the luxury of being able to do that. But, Steelers definitely have a need at running back, especially now Connor's gone. But I think there's a lot of other holes at the team that are probably more... Well, I suppose I was going to say a lot of other holes that are more important. But then, do you want a strong running game to try and kind of take some of the pressure off Big Ben? But then without without an O-line, how good's your running game going to be? So, it's a tough one, isn't it? Could even the Jets with their first round pick at 23? Oh, sorry. If the Jets have got 2 first round picks, don't they?
Yeah, the Jets, Jags, and Dolphins have got 2.
Yeah, 23 from the Seahawks. I could even see them taking the running back there, to be honest. I think if the top 2 running backs are still there at 34, the Jets will take one of them if they haven't already at 23. So I can't see a running back going in the first half of the first round, but, anywhere from Pittsburgh Steelers or New York Jets, Pittsburgh Steelers onwards, then, we could see one of them go off the board.
Phil, I mean, I'm going to have to start. I can't let you get away with it. This just sums up your draft analysis, is that you suggested that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will just pick the best running back in the draft just because he's there and they've got nothing else to do. So I think that just sums up the Tampa Bay Buccaneers needs. I will just pick up Najee Harris and he can just carry the water for everyone.
But that's exactly it. We've got all of our starters back from last year, so we don't have a positional need for this year, so we can draft for the future. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
I think that it sums up your... you can just be the water boy because we've got so many Super Bowl winning players. I just love
the fact that if the Green Bay Packers set up correctly on the last play before the half in the playoffs, the Buccaneers would look very differently in the world than they do now. But yeah, maybe.
I'm kind of with, and I'm not with Phil in his analysis. I think... I agree that I don't believe a running back will go top 15 or 20. I just don't see it happening. There's not enough, like you say, there isn't enough, Saquon Barkley style players to make you want to go high and lean on that kind of player because teams have been burnt before. I do think, though, that you look at both the Miami Dolphins and the Jets have got 2 first-round picks, and I think both have a need at running back. And if you can see... Najee Harris there or Travis Etienne, then you take them. I think for me, though, those 2 guys are the ones that get the kind of all the plaudits. But for me, they're not I wouldn't say either of those guys is the best running back in the draft. I think they're very fortunate that both of those guys play on the best offenses in the league. Alabama and Clemson. Okay, you've got arguably the best quarterbacks around, you've got the best wide receivers around them, so the running game is always going to be fairly strong. And in terms of physical traits, they're both good, but for me, I think Javonte Williams from North Carolina is better. I think North Carolina have got 2 really good running backs now. I don't think either of them will go in the first round, but I do think that Williams is probably... I think Williams is the best running back in the draft. I think he's an absolute monster of a player. He's got great hands. He can do everything. So he would be the running back that I would be taking. But I do think Harris and Etienne will probably go before them. But I do think it will be late first round.
I think the Dolphins are the team that I think are in best position to do something spectacular, because their 2 first-round picks are both top 20. They're 6 and 18. And I think it's that 6th pick that kind of opens out the Dolphins to, well, let's see what we can do here. If the Bengals take Sewell, if the Dolphins are looking at O-line as something they want to invest in, well, Jalen Mayfield, Elijah Vera-Tucker, Christian Darrisaw will all be available. I think the important thing with Dolphins as well is the Dolphins don't need a left tackle as their priority. The Dolphins need a right tackle as their priority because Tua's a lefty. So Tua can see what's coming from the left. He can't see what's coming from the right. If any of those O-line players can play right at that level, great. They will absolutely take them. But there is a difference between playing left tackle and playing right tackle like a left tackle in standard. And if you don't think the person who's available to you can make that change and convert and change kind of how they play and how they approach the position, then yeah, you're probably better off just saying, okay, yes, we took Kyle Pitts, but let's take Najee Harris as well.
All we can do is speculate, but I think the Dolphins, for me, strike me as a team who have a plan, because after you trade the way they did with they made sure they very quickly got themselves a pick back in the top 10. And that says to me there's a plan. You know, they didn't want to wait till the night. They didn't want to, you know, they've set themselves up with something really clear in mind. And that, you know, that strikes me that's probably a bit like we said with some other franchises in recent years, a team who absolutely have a vision of where they want to be. And all of the things you've just said, JB, could fit. Maybe it's a certain O-lineman, maybe it's a skill player. I mean, just rounding out, though, our chat about running backs before we leave that behind forever. As much as I don't disagree with anything that you have said, I do think for me, running backs and kickers are the great mystery for me of the NFL. And I appreciate people go, well, you know, you can pick up running backs, you know, certain running backs you could put in any running back in a certain scheme and you'll get enough value from them. But when you look at the points that come as a result of running backs and kickers, the fact that they are still as undervalued as they are in the NFL makes no sense to me at all. I mean, kickers actually particularly. The fact that nobody would ever dream of taking a kicker really... I mean, was it the Bucks who did it a few years ago with maybe even a second-round pick? And, you know, we're almost a laughingstock. I mean, that one sadly didn't work out for them either. But, I mean, you've got to look at running backs and think if you take... I mean, Etienne has broken all kinds of college records, has equated for more than 20 touchdowns in a season, you know, ends a college career with, you know, literally 50 yards short of 5,000 all-purpose yards. And, I mean, you made the point, Aldrin, about Williams and Carter both in North Carolina, and you wonder if either one of them had been the one showcase back, and that's not really North Carolina style anyway, but you wonder in a different setup whether they could have been the star. But, I mean, surely if these guys aren't going top 20, these are potentially the kind of players who could make an immediate difference to an already strong team. If you're one of those teams picking between 20 and 30, forget the Jets and the Dolphins for a minute, you know, with their double picks. But this is good teams having the opportunities to get potentially great players. And I mean, you go, well, one of the reasons that, you know, people aren't prepared to pick running backs so high anymore is they look at what happened with Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley, you know, and a few others. Well, as much as they have had down season, I mean, Barkley, obviously injury, you know, Elliott in part coming back from injury. An injury is probably a factor here with how people rate running backs. But if you were to say to me that Saquon Barkley or Ezekiel Elliott was about to run 2,000 yards this season, I'd think it's unlikely, but I wouldn't think it's impossible. And it seems odd to me that when we have had these superstar backs come into the league, who, have been, you know, hit and found themselves injured, McCaffrey would be another example, that people don't look beyond that to see the fact that these are truly game-changing talents if you can have them fitting on the field.
I think that point is probably the most interesting. And it baffles me why running backs aren't drafted higher, because that's where the value of running backs is, to my mind, is in the draft. When you get to the point where these guys, 4 or 5 years in, and then you're having to pay them money, that's where the risk is for me. You end up with a Todd Gurley situation where somebody plays brilliantly for 4 years, then you have to pay them, upwards of $10-15 million per season, and then they get injured, and that's where you lose them. I think if you can get 4 good years out of a top quality college running back, and they do brilliantly for you for 4 years, then happy days. Let them walk, and then somebody else can pay them over the odds. But yeah, I think if you pick up a draft guy, that's where you get the value.
But also, the thing with a running back is, the way that a lot of these college teams play, and even before there was this whole debate about how many offenses are pro-style offenses at college football. I mean, I think there's probably more that has influenced the NFL from the college game in the last 10 years than the other way around. But again, that's a big point we don't have time for today. But I mean, the other thing about running backs is they're ready to play week 1, aren't they? I mean, we're talking about a quarterback, maybe even 2 of the quarterbacks who go top 10, having redshirt seasons where they sit behind a veteran and learn the ropes. Well, I don't think you do that with running backs that often, do you? At college into NFL transition, they're running hard on the first down of game 1 if they've got the talent. So I don't know. It just seems odd to me. As much as I think everything you guys are saying is right, there are, for me, 4 really good running backs coming into the draft that we've just mentioned who, will offer great value for someone, particularly if they're going, from pick 15 or 20 onwards.
The challenge I think you have with running backs, though, and admittedly this is something that you can hit otherwhere, is there will be good running backs available at various places in the draft and even after the draft itself. We sort of a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the upside for the Chargers in having Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler went undrafted in 2017. Phil's already mentioned the Jacksonville Jaguars potentially not needing a running back because they liked what they saw from James Robinson last season. James Robinson went undrafted last season. And even going further than that, there was a lot of talk in the offseason about where James White was going to go. Was he going to stay with the Patriots? Was he potentially, as people expected, going to migrate to Tampa Bay to play with Tom Brady? Or was he just going to go somewhere else? This is James White, who probably should have been the Super Bowl MVP that season. He was drafted in the 4th round. Of the 8 players who are in the 2,000-yard club, Terrell Davis was the 4th for the Broncos, and he went in the 5th round. It is not unlikely that you can pick up talent, especially for a running back or something like that, later in the draft. And yeah, you can make that argument for any player. Joe Montana was a 4th round pick. We don't need to talk about where Tom Brady was drafted because we've done enough of that already, as has everybody in the NFL. There are diamonds in every round, but I think historically there are more serviceable, functional, above average running backs, which is at the bare minimum what a team needs, that you can find in the 4th, 5th and 6th just as much as you could in the 1st, 2nd or 3rd. Aldrin's point about, the value for a running back is getting them early, getting that rookie thing before they get on too much wear. But that applies at any pick. It doesn't have to be the 1st.
But my point, I think my point is only subtly different to yours. I don't know if you've got... So my point is, I don't doubt what you say is right, and I don't doubt that there will be great running backs who are going in the latter rounds, let alone the latter part of the 1st or into the 2nd. But what I'm saying is, when you think about college players coming from college setup to NFL, if you think about first-year true rookie players, and you look at rookie players who've had big impact seasons, transform their teams, I just think running back... So I don't doubt that there are great running backs 4, 5, 6, 7, and maybe even undrafted. I just think that only occurs because of the point I was making, that generally speaking, the running back position is undervalued for reasons that just seem bizarre to me. I mean, I'll come back to this, but kickers, you look at how many points kickers are responsible for, and we all know there are those kickers in the league that are absolutely money. You don't need to talk to teams like the Baltimore Ravens about the value of a kicker, right? But if you look at how many points you can effectively lose, a bad kicker can cost you games, can cost you wins, probably as much as any other position on the field. And I think kickers and running backs are the two that, I don't doubt that there will be great running backs, and let's say kickers as well, as this fits my general point, who'll go 4, 5, and 6. But I think that's the fault of NFL scouts, not the fault of running backs and kickers.
Well, just to that point, so obviously, as a Colts fan, we picked up Rodrigo Blankenship, undrafted, and I think he scored the most points in the league last year. So, of any player, the kicker position is like you say, it's a weird anomaly where people see absolutely no value in it. Yeah, if you find a good one, they are the linchpin of your team and such a necessity. I mean, you think of Vinatieri kicking field goals in the snow, winning Super Bowls for New England, and you realise how important these players are in clutch moments. But yeah, there's kind of like James says, there's value elsewhere in the draft, and you just find somebody and you happen upon them, and they're great. If we're talking about who we think is going to go in the first round or elsewhere, certainly running backs and kickers are ones that get avoided.
So we've kind of done the big, I think you're right. Like I say, it's a point, I might not understand it, but I think we're all in agreement. So if we've done the fact that the big early picks, there's one offensive lineman in Saul who the world is very excited about. There's a number of wide receivers we think will go one. We've obviously talked Pitts, whether he goes 3, 4, 6, 7. Before we round out, are there any other honourable mentions on the offensive side of the ball that we would want to bring up before we round out this podcast and say farewell for a week until we come back and focus on all the defensive prospects?
I think for me, the kind of position that we've kind of underplayed a little bit, I guess, is the tackle position. And I know we talked about Saul as the splash name player, I guess, coming from Oregon and having protected Justin Herbert's blindside his entire career in college. But I think there's a heck of a lot of value at the tackle position. There's a number of real talented players, which bodes well for me as a Colts fan, because I think we're going to be trying to find a left tackle in the first round if we can. But players like Christian Darrisaw looks exceptional. Obviously, Sewell, I think, will be the first tackle off the board, and rightly so. I think he's got all of the physical traits and expertise to be a starting left tackle for years to come. I think Tevin Jenkins seems to have been a guy that's dipped in and out of the talk of being one of the top tackles on the board from Oklahoma State. I mean, the guy is so aggressive off the line. If you watch him play left tackle, he is vicious. But there's an awful lot of, I think there's an awful lot of talent at the tackle position. And I do think there's a lot of teams that have a need there and don't want to spend the money on older players. I think we saw it enough in the Chiefs clear out of the tackle positions and, potentially seeing what they can draft. So I think there's an awful lot of, there's potentially a lot of gaps from teams that have cut ties with expensive veterans at the tackle positions and will be looking to get younger, and the draft is a great chance for them to do that and pick up value. So I think there's an awful lot of talent there, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of those guys go first round, because there are teams with needs, and protecting the blind side of your quarterback is, it's the insurance to your mortgage payment, as the tackle is.
Well, Sandra Bullock. I mean, the woman is full of wisdom. She really is. Pro Football Focus reckon it's the strongest draft for offensive linemen and interior linemen in a generation. An area where there are a number of very competitive teams who have that as a gap, don't they? And our podcast has highlighted that when you guys have talked, particularly Steelers, Colts, actually. I think, the Cardinals have plenty of holes, but maybe O-line's not necessarily our biggest problem.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, don't forget the Chargers. They're picking relatively high, and they've just lost their starting left tackle. Admittedly, we picked him up, but they've lost their starting left tackle, and there's been talk that, they'd quite like to reunite Justin Herbert with Penei Sewell. So I think there's, like you say, Steelers, Colts, and Chargers, they're three teams that you would be expecting to make the playoffs and push, or trying to push further on in the coming season. And left tackle is a real position of need for all of those.
If it's not Sewell that goes off the board first, it could potentially be Rashawn Slater as well. I think his versatility is kind of seen as a bit of a key. You know, even when looking at the Bengals, if the Bengals decided to trade down, they would, you know, if as I mentioned earlier, they say that their 2 tackle positions are locked up, then they might like someone like Slater who can play across the line, especially as their centre's just been injured as well. So he'll go. There is some talk about him going top 10, but I don't know. I think he might go top 15. But definitely if Sewell's off the board first, I think you could see Slater off the board second, and he could even go to the Chargers.
Well, I think we've done the offensive players justice. I think we are only becoming more and more excited as to what this draft of all drafts might hold. And shall we get together again in 7 days' time to talk all things defence? Well, gentlemen, your company was a treat as ever. Phil, I think we need to work on a NFL draft-themed quiz of the week in future pods. I think we absolutely need to get that on the radar as well. Yeah. But your company was a treat as always, gentlemen, and I'll catch up with you again in 7 days.
Thanks everybody.
Bye.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe
and be cool. Tell your friends.